In the middle of a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood, a 14-year-old boy bent down to pick up a coin. It wasn't stolen, it wasn't rare, it wasn't even valuable. But the moment it hit the floor, it cracked open and exposed a secret that would eventually lead to one of the most shocking Cold War spy arrests in American history. Inside that ordinary nickel was something that didn't belong in any pocket or piggy bank. No president, no mint mark, just a hidden compartment, and a message written in a language no one could read. A message never meant to be found. A message designed to stay silent forever. At the height of the Cold War, when fear traveled faster than facts and enemies hid behind everyday faces, this single accident became a problem no one could explain. The police didn't know what they were holding. The experts couldn't decode it. And the federal agents who took possession of the coin had no suspect, no sender, and no idea how deep the truth went. Years passed. The clue stayed locked. The trail went cold. Until one man broke. What followed was not a chase through dark alleys or a dramatic shootout, but something far more unsettling, a quiet unraveling of a life carefully built on lies. A man who lived among artists and neighbors. A man who smiled, paid rent, and blended in. A man who was never supposed to exist. This is a story about how intelligence agencies miss what's right in front of them, about how the smallest details, objects you'd never notice, can expose secrets powerful nations are desperate to protect, and about how a single mistake can collapse an entire hidden world. Welcome to Unseen Truth Stories, where forgotten clues resurface, hidden histories are uncovered, and the truth is never as simple as it seems. Because sometimes, the most dangerous secrets aren't buried deep underground. They're sitting quietly in your pocket. Brooklyn in the early 1950s was a place of routines. Streets followed schedules, doors opened at the same hours, and every morning, the sound of footsteps and folded newspapers echoed through apartment buildings before most people were fully awake. 14-year-old Jimmy was part of that rhythm. Like many boys his age, he delivered newspapers before school, moving from door to door, collecting a few coins at a time. Pennies, dimes, nickels, nothing special. Just enough to help his family and maybe save a little for himself. That morning felt no different. At one apartment, a customer handed him a nickel as payment. Jimmy slipped it into his pocket without a second thought. He'd handled thousands just like it. Same size, same weight, same dull shine that came from being passed through too many hands. But later that day, alone in his bedroom, something about the coin bothered him. It didn't feel right. There was no obvious damage, no crack, no visible seam, and yet, when he held it between his fingers, it seemed off. Slightly lighter, slightly hollow. The kind of detail you notice only when boredom gives you time to pay attention. Jimmy did what teenagers do when curiosity wins. He dropped the coin onto the floor. Instead of a metallic clink, the nickel made a strange sound and split cleanly into two perfect halves. The boy froze. This wasn't a trick coin from a magic shop. Inside was a tiny, precisely cut cavity. And inside that cavity was something even stranger. A small piece of film, rolled tighter than a matchstick, covered in rows of numbers so small they barely looked real. No writing. No words. Just numbers. Jimmy didn't know it yet, but he was holding something that had traveled across borders, passed through invisible hands, and survived exactly as it was designed to, unnoticed. Until now. Confused and uneasy, he showed the coin to his family. They tried to make sense of it, joking at first, then growing quiet. This wasn't a toy. Someone had spent time and skill creating it. Someone had wanted this message hidden perfectly inside an object no one would ever question. The police were called. When officers arrived, they examined the nickel and the mysterious message inside. They'd seen stolen goods, weapons, and counterfeit money before, but nothing like this. The numbers meant nothing to them. And yet, instinct told them this wasn't harmless. Soon, the coin was passed upward, away from a Brooklyn bedroom and into federal hands. By the time it reached the FBI, the boy who found it was no longer important. The apartment, the neighborhood, even the drop itself, all background noise. What mattered was the coin, because whoever put that message inside believed it would never be opened, that it would pass from pocket to pocket, unnoticed, protected by its own simplicity. They were right about one thing. No one had been looking for it. And that was exactly the problem. When the hollow nickel reached federal investigators, it arrived without context, without a sender, and without a crime attached to it. There was no suspect to interrogate, no location to trace, no obvious threat to neutralize, just a coin and a message that refused to explain itself. The tiny strip of film was carefully removed and magnified. Under proper lighting, the numbers became clear, column after column, groups separated with mathematical precision. No names, no dates, no recognizable pattern. It wasn't written in Russian, English, or any known language. It wasn't a cipher anyone could casually crack. To the FBI, that was immediately unsettling. Codes were nothing new. Criminals used them. Smugglers used them. Even amateur spies tried their luck. But this message was different. It was clean, professional, designed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly how not to be found. Cryptographers went to work. They tested substitution ciphers, frequency analysis, mathematical sequences. Every standard method failed. The numbers didn't repeat the way normal codes did. There were no anchors, no predictable words like attack, location, or date. It was as if the message had been cut loose from meaning itself. Weeks turned into months. The coin sat in evidence while analysts circled the same dead end. Without a reference point, the numbers were useless. And without understanding the message, there was no way to know if this was espionage, a prank, or something even worse. Slowly, interest faded. The case was officially filed away, not closed, but dormant. Another unsolved oddity in a building full of them. The hollow nickel became a footnote, something mentioned in passing, something that might matter someday. But not today. What the FBI didn't yet know was that this wasn't a traditional code at all. It was something far more secure and far more dangerous. A system designed so that even if the message was discovered, it would still remain silent. A system that required a second piece. A key that did not exist anywhere in the United States. And while the nickel gathered dust, the person it was meant for continued living their life uninterrupted. Paying rent. Walking city streets. Blending into crowds. Confident that the system was working exactly as intended. Because in the world of professional espionage, success isn't about brilliance, it's about patience. And patience was winning. For now. What no one realized was that the key to unlocking the nickel wasn't hidden in a safe or buried underground. It was walking freely somewhere in the world, carrying secrets heavy enough to shatter the silence. For the FBI, unresolved cases were nothing new. Files stacked up. Leads went cold. Evidence waited. And so, quietly and without ceremony, the hollow nickel was absorbed into the background noise of unfinished business. 4 years passed. The coin remained locked away, cataloged and preserved, its message still unreadable. From time to time, someone would pull the file, glance over the notes, and shake their head. The numbers hadn't changed. The mystery hadn't moved. There was nowhere to go. And that was the most dangerous part. Because while the investigation stood still, the system behind the message was still alive. Somewhere in New York City, a man continued his routine with careful precision. He had no reason to panic, no reason to flee. From his perspective, nothing had gone wrong. The coin had disappeared, yes, but disappearances happened. Dead drops failed. Couriers made mistakes. That didn't mean exposure. It simply meant patience. This was how illegals were trained to think. Not like spies in movies, but like shadows. They lived without urgency, without visible ambition. They avoided attention not by hiding, but by appearing ordinary. Artists, photographers, immigrants, men with quiet lives and forgettable faces. And so, the silence continued. Inside FBI headquarters, the Cold War pressed on. Bigger threats demanded attention: missiles, military secrets, defectors, informants. Compared to that, a single unreadable code felt small, academic, almost irrelevant. Until it wasn't. Because espionage doesn't announce itself with explosions. It works slowly, invisibly. Years can pass before anyone realizes damage has been done. And that nickel? It wasn't a warning. It was proof. Proof that someone with serious training had operated inside the United States and left behind something so advanced that even federal experts couldn't penetrate it. Proof that there was a system in place and that the system was confident enough to survive discovery. Confidence like that only comes from experience. From knowing your methods are unbreakable. From believing the other side will never find the missing piece. But history has a habit of breaking confidence in unexpected ways. Not through technology, not through force, but through people. Because while codes can stay silent forever, people can't. They get scared. They make mistakes. They defect. And somewhere beyond American borders, a man was beginning to understand that his own silence might not protect him much longer. The hollow nickel had been waiting for 4 years. Soon, someone would arrive who could finally teach it how to speak. To understand why the hollow nickel mattered so much, you had to understand the world that created it. A world that existed quietly alongside everyday life, invisible unless something went wrong. During the Cold War, intelligence agencies didn't rely only on diplomats or officials with clear access to secrets. They relied on something far riskier: illegals. These were spies sent to foreign countries with no official protection, no diplomatic cover, and no safety net. If they were caught, they would be disowned, forgotten. Illegals were trained for years before ever crossing a border. They learned languages until accents disappeared. They memorized false histories until lies felt like memory. They practiced living boring lives because boredom was camouflage. And they communicated using methods designed to survive discovery. A hollow coin was not clever because it was flashy. It was clever because it was boring. Coins were everywhere. They passed through hands without thought. No one inspected them. No one questioned them. A perfect hiding place. Inside the nickel wasn't just a message. It was part of a much larger system. A network that depended on dead drops, coded signals, and one-time pads, encryption tools so secure that without the correct key, the message was mathematically impossible to decode. That was why the FBI had failed. Not because they lacked intelligence, but because the system wasn't meant to be broken. It wasn't meant to survive mistakes, but if a mistake happened, the damage would still be contained. The sender could disappear. The receiver could wait. The message would say nothing, and waiting was not a problem for professionals. In New York, the man at the center of this system lived quietly. He didn't rush to recover the missing coin. He didn't contact anyone. That would have been dangerous. Instead, he adjusted, changed routines, trusted that the training would hold. It usually did. Because for every hollow coin discovered, hundreds were never found. For every failed drop, countless others succeeded. Intelligence work was never about perfection, it was about probability. And probability favored silence. That was why the FBI didn't yet understand what they were facing. They weren't chasing a criminal reacting to danger. They were watching a ghost who believed time was on his side. But the system had one weakness it could never eliminate: human fear. Thousands of miles away, someone who knew about that coin, someone who understood the numbers and the system behind them, was starting to doubt his own future. And when fear finally outweighed loyalty, the quiet world behind the nickel would begin to collapse. In the summer of 1957, far from Brooklyn streets and FBI filing cabinets, a man arrived in Paris carrying nothing that marked him as dangerous. No weapon, no documents worth stealing, no obvious secrets. What he carried instead was fear. His name, at least the one he used, meant nothing to most people. He was not famous. He was not important in the way leaders or generals were important. He was a small part of a much larger machine, the kind of man designed to be replaceable. And that was exactly the problem. For years he had lived under orders that demanded silence above all else. He followed instructions, passed messages, trusted the system. But systems don't protect people forever. They protect outcomes. Somewhere along the way, he understood something that couldn't be unlearned. If anything went wrong, he would be the first to be erased. So he defected. When he contacted American authorities, they didn't immediately believe him. Defectors were common during the Cold War. Some were genuine, many were liars. Some were sent deliberately to spread misinformation. Every claim had to be tested slowly, carefully. Then he mentioned a coin, not just any coin, but a hollow one, a nickel. A message hidden inside. That changed everything. The FBI retrieved the long-forgotten evidence, the numbers, the file, the 4 years of silence. When they placed the microfilm in front of the defector, recognition crossed his face instantly. Not surprise, not confusion. Familiarity. He explained what the FBI had never been able to see. The numbers weren't meant to make sense on their own. They were paired with a one-time pad, a matching sheet of random numbers that existed somewhere else. Without that exact sheet, the message was meaningless. With it, the code dissolved completely. This was the missing key. With the defector's help, the FBI finally decoded the message. And what they found wasn't a dramatic instruction or a threat. It was worse. It was confirmation. Confirmation that a Soviet intelligence network was operating successfully inside the United States. Confirmation that someone in New York was active, skilled, and protected by layers of anonymity. Confirmation that the hollow nickel wasn't a curiosity, it was evidence. The defector didn't know everything. But he knew enough. Names, habits, procedures. Enough to point investigators in the right direction. And once the FBI knew where to look, the silence that had lasted 4 years ended abruptly. Because the man the message was meant for wasn't hiding. He was living in plain sight. Once the numbers spoke, the investigation changed instantly. The hollow nickel was no longer an isolated mystery. It was a thread, and now the FBI had permission to pull it. The defector described a man operating in New York. Not loudly, not recklessly, but with the calm discipline of someone who had done this before and expected to do it for many years to come. A man who avoided attention by embracing routine. A man who did not look like a spy because he never tried to look like anything at all. He went by different names depending on the situation. To neighbors and acquaintances, he was an immigrant artist, a photographer, a quiet man with a modest apartment and an unremarkable lifestyle. He paid his bills on time. He had no flashy possessions, no suspicious visitors, no visible political opinions. To Soviet intelligence, he was something else entirely. A master illegal. Illegals were not collectors of rumors, they were architects. They recruited sources, managed networks, transmitted intelligence back home through layers of encryption and intermediaries. They operated without embassies, without official ties, and without rescue plans. If caught, they were alone. The FBI began watching the man discreetly. No dramatic confrontations, no sudden moves. Just patience, the same patience their target had relied on for years. Agents tracked his movements through New York streets, noted his habits, his timing, the way he blended into crowds without effort. He didn't rush. He didn't linger. He moved like someone who understood how easily patterns could betray you. Still, nothing obvious surfaced. And that was the most unsettling part. Because experience told investigators that amateurs made mistakes quickly. Professionals made them slowly or not at all. This man showed no signs of panic, even as surveillance quietly tightened around him. It was as if he sensed nothing had changed, or worse, as if he had already accepted that one day everything would. The FBI needed proof, not suspicion, not intuition. Evidence that could survive courtrooms and international consequences. And so they waited, collecting fragments, small details, minor inconsistencies. Then came the search. Inside his living space, investigators uncovered a second life hidden beneath the first. Specialized cameras, invisible inks, encoded notes. Tools designed not for theft, but for communication. Tools designed for someone who expected to operate unseen for decades. The quiet artist had never been ordinary. He had been patient. And now, the world he built on silence was beginning to collapse under its own precision. Once the FBI confirmed what they were dealing with, speed became the enemy. Moving too fast could alert the man they were watching, and a professional like this would vanish long before handcuffs ever appeared. So they slowed everything down. Surveillance was expanded quietly. Different agents, different schedules, no familiar faces, no predictable routines. The goal wasn't to corner him, it was to understand him. To learn how someone survives for years in hostile territory without leaving fingerprints behind. He walked the city like it belonged to him. Not boldly, not nervously, just comfortably. He used public transportation, blended into crowds, and avoided habits that could be traced. He carried no obvious secrets, no documents, no signs of urgency. If he suspected he was being watched, he never showed it. That was the mark of training. Investigators noticed how he communicated indirectly, brief meetings in public places, conversations that sounded meaningless to anyone listening, walks that looped back on themselves, not out of paranoia, but verification. He wasn't checking for tails obsessively. He was confirming absence. This wasn't a man waiting for orders. This was a man trusted to make decisions on his own. The longer the surveillance continued, the clearer it became that the hollow nickel wasn't an exception, it was part of a larger disciplined system, one that depended on subtlety, not frequency. Messages sent rarely, carefully, only when necessary. That restraint was dangerous, because it meant fewer mistakes. The FBI needed something solid, something undeniable. They couldn't rely on circumstantial suspicion. An arrest without proof would risk exposing sources, methods, and international tensions, all for a man who could still walk free. So they waited for the moment when preparation outweighed patience. That moment came not from a sudden move, but from routine. A search warrant was quietly approved. Not rushed, not dramatic, just enough to confirm what surveillance already suggested. Investigators entered his apartment expecting resistance. They found none. What they did find was confirmation. Hidden in ordinary objects were tools meant to vanish into plain sight, equipment for microphotography, materials used to conceal messages, notes written in ways meant to survive casual discovery. It wasn't chaos, it was order. Everything had a place, everything had a purpose. This was not a man experimenting with espionage. This was a professional at the end of a very long career, and still, even with evidence mounting, the man remained calm, cooperative, polite. He answered questions without revealing anything useful. He gave names that led nowhere, stories that couldn't be disproven. He understood something the investigators did too. The real battle hadn't begun yet. Because catching a spy was one thing, proving who he truly was something else entirely. The arrest did not come with shouting or sirens. There was no dramatic chase through New York streets. No attempt to run, no last-minute destruction of evidence. When federal agents finally moved in, the man they had watched for so long did not resist. He expected this moment. Inside a small hotel room, agents approached him calmly and asked a simple question. Not about the nickel, not about the code, just his name. He gave one. It wasn't the truth. When pressed, he did not panic. He did not argue. He didn't demand a lawyer immediately or plead confusion. Instead, he smiled slightly and offered something far more unsettling: cooperation without clarity. He would talk, but only about what didn't matter. The arrest itself was almost anticlimactic. No weapons were drawn. No violence occurred. A master spy, someone who had operated undetected for years, was taken into custody as quietly as he had lived. And that silence followed him into interrogation. Agents questioned him for hours. They laid out what they knew: the hollow nickel, the decoded message, the tools recovered from his apartment, the defector who had identified him. He listened carefully. Then he denied everything. Not aggressively, not emotionally. He simply declined to confirm any part of the story. He offered alternate explanations, half-truths, identities that led nowhere. His answers were calm, precise, and deliberately incomplete. This was not arrogance, it was discipline. The FBI soon realized they weren't interrogating a man trying to escape punishment. They were dealing with someone trained to protect something larger than himself. Someone who understood that silence could still be useful, even in a jail cell. When the case went to trial, the tension shifted from intelligence work to strategy. The evidence was strong: the tools, the codes, the false identity. But proving espionage required more than suspicion. It required connecting intention to action. And the defendant gave nothing away. In court, he appeared ordinary, respectful, almost forgettable. No outbursts, no speeches, no confessions. He allowed his attorneys to speak while he watched quietly, aware that every word mattered. Behind the scenes, another calculation was taking place. This man was valuable, not because of what he had done, but because of who he was. Executing him would end the story quickly. Keeping him alive preserved options. Leverage. Possibilities that extended far beyond the courtroom. The sentence reflected that understanding. He would spend decades in prison, but not forever. Because in the Cold War, justice was rarely the final move. It was a pause. A way to keep the game going. When the verdict was delivered, it sounded final. The man with two names was sentenced to decades behind bars, removed from the world he had navigated so carefully. On paper, the story appeared to be over. But intelligence work rarely ends at sentencing. From the moment he was convicted, the question inside government circles wasn't whether he was guilty. That had been settled. The real question was what he was worth, because spies like this weren't common criminals. They were assets, living ones. Executing him would satisfy public justice, but it would erase leverage. And during the Cold War, leverage mattered more than closure. So he was kept alive. Inside prison, he remained exactly what he had been outside of it: quiet, controlled, and careful. He did not attempt escape. He did not bargain. He did not offer information in exchange for comfort. He accepted his sentence as if it were another assignment, another phase of a long operation. That restraint did not go unnoticed. Behind closed doors, officials understood that somewhere on the other side of the Iron Curtain, someone was paying attention. Someone knew who he really was. Someone might eventually want him back. And that day came sooner than expected. In a different part of the world, another man was captured. An American pilot. His aircraft had been shot down over hostile territory. Suddenly, the balance shifted. Both sides held something the other wanted. Quiet discussions began. Not in public. Not in headlines. Through intermediaries and diplomats, Careful signals were exchanged. The spy in New York was no longer just a prisoner, he was a piece on a much larger board. When the exchange finally happened, it was simple and symbolic. Two men walked toward each other from opposite sides. No speeches, no apologies, just a transfer of human leverage. The master spy disappeared back into the system that had trained him. The pilot returned home. To the public, it looked like a clean ending, a fair trade, a moment of balance restored. But beneath that surface was a deeper truth, one that made the hollow nickel case far more disturbing than it first appeared. The spy had never truly failed. He had been exposed, yes, arrested, tried, and imprisoned. But the damage he had already done would never be fully known. The networks he helped build didn't vanish overnight. Others replaced him. Others adapted. The system survived. And the accidental discovery that began it all, a dropped coin on a bedroom floor, stood as a reminder that intelligence wars weren't won by strength alone. They were won by attention, by chance, by the smallest cracks in ordinary objects. When the story of the hollow nickel is told, it's often framed as a victory. A clever spy exposed, a hidden network disrupted, a dangerous enemy uncovered inside American borders. But that version is comforting and incomplete. Because the most unsettling part of this case isn't that a master spy was caught, it's how he was caught. There was no brilliant breakthrough, no advanced technology, no heroic informant planted deep inside enemy lines. The case did not begin with intelligence, it began with accident. A moment of boredom, a coin dropped on a bedroom floor. That should trouble anyone paying attention. The nickel wasn't discovered because the system failed. It was discovered because reality interfered. Gravity did what counterintelligence could not. And if that coin had landed differently, if it hadn't split cleanly, if the boy had shrugged and pocketed it again, the message would have remained silent forever. The spy would have continued his work uninterrupted. This is what intelligence agencies understand but rarely admit publicly. Most secrets are never found. Most networks are never exposed. For every case that becomes famous, there are countless others that dissolve quietly into history, without leaving a trace. The hollow nickel case survived only because it created something rare, physical proof. Something tangible. Something undeniable. Even then, it took 4 years and a human defection to make that proof meaningful. That timeline matters. It means that during those 4 silent years, information was moving. Decisions were being influenced. Outcomes were being shaped. The cost of that delay can't be measured, because no one ever fully knows what was lost. The man at the center of the case understood this better than anyone. That's why he never panicked. Why he didn't destroy evidence in a rush. Why he accepted arrest with composure. He knew the truth of his profession. Exposure does not equal failure. Silence is success. And silence had protected him for a very long time. The hollow nickel didn't expose espionage because it was clever. It exposed it because it was fragile. Because even the most carefully constructed systems can't account for randomness. For children. For accidents. That's the lesson buried inside this story. Not that spies will always be caught, but that history sometimes turns on moments so small they don't even feel important when they happen. A coin. A drop. A crack. And suddenly, the invisible becomes visible. When the hollow nickel case finally became public, it offered something rare, a complete narrative. A beginning. A middle. An end. A mystery discovered, decoded, and resolved. That sense of completion is comforting. But it's also misleading, because the truth is, cases like this are remembered precisely because they are exceptions. They stand out not because espionage was stopped, but because, briefly, it was visible. Intelligence agencies operate on a simple reality: you never know how much you don't know. For every dropped coin that cracks open, there are thousands that never fall. For every defector who speaks, there are many who remain silent. And for every spy exposed, there are others who finish their work, retire quietly, and disappear without ever being named. The hollow nickel reminds us that espionage doesn't usually announce itself with drama. It moves through everyday life, through rent payments, friendly conversations, ordinary routines. It thrives in predictability. It hides in boredom. The man at the center of this story was not extraordinary because he was caught. He was extraordinary because he wasn't, at least not for a long time. He survived not through brilliance alone, but through restraint, through patience, through the understanding that attention is the enemy. That understanding hasn't disappeared. The methods change. Coins become digital signals. Microfilm becomes encrypted data. Dead drops move from park benches to online spaces. But the core principles remain the same: blend in, wait, and never assume discovery is imminent. What makes the hollow nickel case enduring isn't just its historical significance, it's its relevance. It forces an uncomfortable question. How many hidden systems are operating right now, unnoticed, simply because nothing has gone wrong yet? History often celebrates intelligence victories, but it rarely measures the cost of what was never uncovered. The decisions influenced quietly, the information passed successfully, the outcomes shaped without anyone realizing why. This case survived because chance intervened. Not vigilance, not foresight, chance. And that's the most unsettling conclusion of all. Because chance cannot be relied upon. The hollow nickel sits in history as a reminder that the line between exposure and invisibility is thinner than we like to believe, and that sometimes the only difference between a forgotten secret and a global consequence is a moment no one planned for. Our hollow nickel story doesn't end with handcuffs, a courtroom, or a prisoner exchange. It ends with something far less comforting. Uncertainty. A spy was exposed, but only after years of silence. A network was revealed, but never fully erased. A message was decoded, but long after it had already done its work. What remains isn't a sense of victory, but a quiet understanding of how fragile truth really is. The Cold War is remembered for speeches, threats, and standoffs. But beneath all of that, history was shaped by moments no one noticed. By ordinary objects, routine actions, and people who never knew they were standing near something dangerous. The hollow nickel wasn't discovered because someone was watching closely. It was discovered because something went wrong. And that's the part that should stay with us. If one of the most carefully hidden secrets of its time was revealed by accident, then how many others were never exposed? How many messages were never dropped, never cracked open, never questioned? This is why stories like this matter. At Unseen Truth Stories, we explore the moments history tried to hide, the overlooked details, the forgotten clues, the truths that surface only when silence breaks. Not the loud versions of the past, but the quiet ones that shaped everything behind the scenes. If these are the kinds of stories that make you pause, question, and look twice at the ordinary, then you already belong here. Because the most important truths are rarely obvious, and there are many more still waiting to be uncovered.